I think you're
right.
the expert car counter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm the obsessive compulsive guy. I don't have a basement, nor does my mom, unfortunately. So I don't live in there and eat hot pockets. But
Well,
I
you do
do.
eat Hot Pockets, though, right?
I did eat one hot pocket, and no, it was adequate.
The TSLAQ podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended for and should not be used as financial, investment, or trading advice. Research associated with fiscal decisions should be conducted elsewhere. The host of the show possesses no license or credentials to warrant accepting advice based on what is heard on the TSLAQ podcast. Additionally, even though the host and guests may hold positions in companies discussed on the show, they don't have insights into the next time step of the simulation. Therefore, do not make any financial decisions based on the contents of this podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode number 18 of the TSLAQ podcast. Today's episode is an interview with Scooter from Twitter. He's a member of the Shorty Air Force / Shorty Ground Force. Remember, if you'd like to donate to the podcast, go to the Square Cash app and search for TSLAQ podcast. That's TSLAQ podcast. Sorry, it only takes debit cards. I'd like to see some more $1 and $2 donations there. Don't feel bad about giving a small amount. Give what you can. Save your money for puts if you'd like. And also, don't forget to visit the Shorty store at evacuationboy.com. Get your Shorty merch. There are some nice coffee mugs and even some posters. And with that, we'll get to the interview. All right. This is going to be episode number 18 of the TSLAQ podcast. I'm joined today by Scooter from Twitter. Scooter, welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for having me on. I know I've been trying for a bit to get on the podcast, so it's pretty exciting. Thanks for giving me some time. I appreciate it.
No problem. Your Twitter handle is James Santelli1, if people want to look for you.
Yep, that is correct.
So I guess we'll go ahead and jump right into it. What is your TSLAQ origin story, or your Tesla following or Elon Musk following origin story?
Okay. Oh boy. So been sort of a retail investor for a while, and I like to talk about a story like way back in probably 2014 or 15 time frame, and there was this company called GTAT. It's GTATQ now, but they sold glass for Apple iPhones, and they were valued like something ridiculous. I don't remember. I think it was like multiple billions of dollars, and all they did was manufacture this stupid sapphire that was synthetic, and turns out they owed Apple a lot of money, and Apple was under no contract to take the glass, and they went bankrupt. And I was turned into a bag holder like really, really quickly there.
So you were long this company?
Yeah, I was long this company because my ex-family relative told me that this was going to be a great company, and like an idiot, I listened to them. And yeah, man, I lost a crap ton of money. But it kind of got me started on like the fraudulent / way overvalued companies that couldn't make bond payments. And that kind of got me looking into Tesla a little bit, and then, it's a wildly overvalued car company. They make nowhere near what Ford and GM do, and they're very insanely valued. And that was back in probably January of 2018. And that was around the same time I started reading some Montana Skeptic, and that got me into Twitter. And then I started following Tesla Charts and Mark, and and sort of all those guys who were from the start saying like, man, this company's full of shit. So that's kind of my origin story.
So it was directly Tesla related, not SolarCity or not SpaceX or anything like that. But
no, it was pretty directly Tesla, and part of it's like the insanity of trying to call a bubble. But I also remember seeing like the video of him shooting a Model S into outer, or whatever it was, a Roadster into outer space.
Yeah, I think it was a Roadster.
And everyone's like going crazy, and it's like the dude like put his car on a rocket. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of cool, but like, what's the big deal? Like, that didn't accomplish anything major. Like, it showed the rocket works.
I actually think that it did serve a purpose for him, and it was, in a way, it was maybe one of the best car commercials that's ever been produced. Very expensive, of course, but and Tesla doesn't pay for advertising. But in that case, indirectly, they did. So my view is actually that was a good move by him to get tons of eyeballs on his vehicles without paying directly for advertising. But obviously, putting the rocket on there, or putting the car on the rocket, costs some money.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I mean, it did get a lot of eyeballs, so in terms of that, it was a very useful thing. But in terms of like, why are people so excited about this? And I just couldn't get it. I mean, it's cool. Like, shooting rockets is cool. Shooting a car into space, I guess, has never been done. So like, that's cool, I guess. But what is this doing to advance the transition to sustainable energy, which is their mission? What is this doing to, really anything productive? And it shows the rocket works. So I guess there's that. And that's important from landing contracts kind of perspective.
So was there a particular financial metric or bond issuance that drew your attention initially?
Just reading Montana Skeptics articles on Seeking Alpha was really enlightening for me. He talked a lot about, kind of the balance sheet analysis and how they didn't have cash flow at the time and how that was going to drive them into the ground if they didn't get things turned around. And it was really interesting. And, you combine the appearance of, hyper growth and overvaluation, and underlying it is they're not making money because they're not selling the mass-produced car that they said they'd make. And it seemed like a pretty reasonable short. And I started in with a pretty small and cautious position, and I did some spread options, and I did some both covered and uncovered, and so I had a pretty effective hedging strategy in the beginning, and now I'm kind of in a balls out, buying just as many put options as I can all the time, which hasn't always been lucrative. In fact, it's actually cost me quite a bit of money, but so it's evolved.
Yeah, and of course the last 2 quarters they have shown that they're cash flow positive, which the bulls would say, oh, they've turned the corner and now they're going to be cash flow positive and profitable from now on. But from what we're seeing inventory wise, that doesn't seem to be the case from a lot of our perspectives.
Yes, 100%. And you could talk kind of about how the cash flow and really they made money. They were profitable in the last 2 quarters. Some of that was through the grace of subsidies for certain.
Yeah, the GHG credits and the zero energy vehicle credits.
Exactly. So I think those 2 things certainly help them get over the line a bit. But really the inventory story is there too, and that kind of brings us, from my origin story, I can start talking about the Shorty Air Force and the Shorty Ground Force and what kind of got me into that.
Yeah. So what did get you into that? I think you're the expert car counter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm the obsessive compulsive guy. I don't have a basement, nor does my mom, unfortunately. So I don't live in there and eat Hot Pockets. But
well, you do eat Hot Pockets, though, right?
I did eat 1 Hot Pocket, and no, it was adequate.
Adequate. That's a very, very high rating.
Yeah, it was. Well, maybe a little too candid. Yeah, so boy, the Shorty Air Force and the Shorty Ground Force and all that stuff. That was some pretty wild times. Because I had some time off work in July, so I was really able to get on Twitter and validate my hypothesis of hey, am I investing too much money unreasonably in this company or against this company? By the way, I should mention none of the things I should say should be construed as financial advice because I'm not a financial advisor or anything like that. So I don't know if I've made that disclaimer yet. So before I talk about whatever my strategy is, which is really shoveling money into a furnace, I'm just letting people know that. Don't take anything I say for that.
Yeah, that can be your disclaimer, and we've got the blanket one for the overall podcast as well. So
blanket one. Okay. All right. Yeah. Sorry, I get distracted easily sometimes. So talking about the Shorty Air Force, Shorty Ground Force. Yeah, so I remember it was probably early to mid-July timeframe of 2018, and that was right when the Model 3 production ramp was really getting into full swing, and they were starting to build a lot of cars. And there was that one day they produced 5,000 factory-gated cars, and boy, that's really excited. And then you parse the words out and you say factory-gated. Well, what does that mean? They didn't sell them. I mean, I guess they made cars, and then that later Business Insider article would come out and say up to 84% of them required rework, and that was pretty crazy. But where are these cars going? They're going somewhere. Oh yeah, so someone, I don't remember who it was, found an ad for a security guard in a newspaper, and it was hey, do you want to be a part-time security guard and look after a bunch of cars in parking lots? And the address was for the lot that they found in Lathrop, and in the picture there were rows upon rows upon rows of Teslas. and it started there for me. And we said, I think it was Machine Planet said like, hey, I've got an airplane, I can fly over that site. And so he did in mid-July, early July maybe. And like, holy crap, there's 3,000 or 4,000, however many cars just sitting out, and that just made no sense to me. And I've got a little bit of obsessive compulsive disorder, so I like to count things. Because I was like, I can look at these cars, I can sit here and have a glass of booze and just count cars all day. And so I did, and I put some cute yellow boxes around it with some comments in the margins and posted it. And it got some likes, and I think it provided some illumination on, hey, how are they running this thing out in Lathrop? So Paul took the pictures, and I counted the cars that were in the pictures, and that was kind of how it worked. And that got some eyeballs on it. I don't know, maybe it inspired people to start looking around, and probably in August timeframe, September timeframe, there were a lot of people who started finding their local, Tesla random abandoned parking lot and started taking pictures of it too. So it wasn't anything really like organized necessarily, but there was a lot of data coming in on Twitter of just all these parking lots, and from there it's like, well, we've got a lot of data on Twitter. I mean, just a fantastic amount of data, and someone can analyze this. So that got me to start my sort of storage site project, which was like, hey, people have posted a lot of these storage sites all around the world. Do we know where these are? Can we get like the location of them, and can we get like a count of the cars and what day the picture was taken? And if you do all that, then, and you can do it in a short time frame too, then you can have a pretty good snapshot of how many cars the company has in inventory at a time.
Mm-hmm. And some of those aerial photos from Lathrop, or however you say it, if I'm not mistaken, I think those may have factored into Tesla's decision to build an enclosed distribution facility in Lathrop so that they could better hide the vehicles from view. I don't know what the plans are for that facility, but it seems that it may have been influenced by the fact that there are people with the ability to take aerial photos.
It may have been, and I've heard some less well-informed bulls on Twitter say, this new Lathrop site, or Lathrop, hard A, soft A, who knows? This new site on Lathrop is going to be where they, build the Model Y, and it's like, well, that seems pretty crazy and ill-informed. So I don't think that's the case. If you look back to, I've got my old graphics up. If you look back to mid-July of 2018, they were already laying the foundation for the large covered facility to the right, or to the whatever direction that is, north of where the cars were stored. So I think it's probable that they had planned to put that there the whole time.
Okay, so it may have not been influenced by the Shorty Air Force.
Yeah, probably not.
Okay, but if it was, that would be kind of fun.
Yeah, I agree.
And a lot of those cars had the infamous Lathrop wax on them, all the dustiness from being stored out in the elements.
Oh yeah, the lemon lot.
Yeah, but with the delivery numbers and the financial numbers that have come out for Q3 and Q4, it seems like they may have gotten rid of a fair number of those vehicles. I don't know if there's any still hanging out there waiting to find a friendly owner.
Yeah, I'm not sure they are. I'm not sure there are still some out there. And the problem for the Shorty Air Force and Shorty Ground Forces has evolved in a lot of ways, because when we first started out, it was kind of a controlled problem. I think there was a user way back in July. I think it was I Spy Tesla was his handle, and he had a camera set up along the tent in Fremont, and he was observing the production that came out of the Fremont tent, and it was near zero, which was kind of interesting. And then you got to Skabushka and his daily production totals and all that sort of stuff. So you had a couple of sources saying hey, your numbers going into your inventory tank, so to speak, if you look at it like a differential equation, your numbers going into the tank are a known quantity right now, and it's pretty low. So then you've got a tank, which is your storage sites across the country. and then your goes outs are your sales figure, and you can figure out the tank size, which the Shorty Air Force, Shorty Ground Force did for a period, I think. But now we've hit the point where they've sold over 100,000 cars. Some maybe to themselves, who knows? But they've sold over 100,000 cars, and that problem of looking at inventory is, I think, less reliable of an indicator than it used to be.
And it's also a lot harder now because you have the cars that are being shipped to Europe and China. Before, it was only the U.S. and Canada, but now we've got a few more markets being sold into.
Yeah, that's very true as well. And I think right now, I think the two kind of useful things that we can capture is the Shorty Air Force, Shorty Ground Force, parking lot truthers. If you listen to some of the paid bots who are out there to try and dox and find us, but the thing we can focus on now is I think measuring like the sale rate. I think LA Tri-Life has been doing an incredible job of this at Marina Del Rey in California, because that used to be one of their most profitable, highest volume sites, and it's slowed by literal orders of magnitude in its sales rate. So that's fascinating for me, is that the demand in the United States, once the $7,500 tax credit at the turn of the new year went away, the demand has just dropped, and I didn't predict that, and I don't think it's fully hit the accounting of the company yet, but I think that's enormous. And I'm not sure that the sales in Europe or China are going to necessarily offset it either.
Yeah, the big number, of course, was 6,500 or maybe almost 6,600 per Edmunds estimate. The 6,500 was from Inside EVs, and that was for January U.S. deliveries, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
and that, of course, compares to like 25,000 for December and September, the end of quarter 3 and end of quarter 4. And of course, the bulls point out that the early months of the quarter have lower deliveries than the later months, but it was still a huge drop off.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that.
I was going to say that Fly4Dat is the Twitter handle, has been estimating European orders, and there's something in the range of like 17 to 18,000 total orders for Europe so far, if I'm not mistaken. And there's been some other research done of Chinese orders, and that totals, I believe, only in the hundreds for Model 3s so far. So those order numbers aren't quite going to make up for the drop to 6,500 in the U.S. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. By no means will it. And the great thing about car carriers is that they move big and they move slow, and they transmit on AIS, so they're very detectable. And you can kind of track that, and that's a known quantity. There are no more than 6,500 cars, because I think that's what the max capacity of like a really big roll-on, roll-off car carrier is, and that it's probably in the range of about 1,500 to 2,000 cars that they're shipping at a time. So when you take that into account, they're not moving cars particularly fast, but they are moving them steadily. And again, I don't think it's at any volume that's going to make up for the enormous drop that we're seeing in the United States in terms of sales.
And there's now the question, of course, of the workers at Zeebrugge, or however you say that port in Belgium. There was some kind of a strike and a contract change, so I guess we'll see if they have people to prep the cars for delivery in Europe as well.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about that. I kind of, like we talked about a little bit earlier, I'm sort of on a different time than the East Coast, so I wake up in the mornings and I have to catch up on everything that happened during the day. So I understand there's sort of a strike, and that I think Tesla had 100 people or so that they had planned to prepare the cars, and now those people all got fired, and they're just going to prepare the cars at the service and delivery centers or something. Does that sound right?
Something to that effect. It was 100 workers that weren't direct Tesla employees, and the contract got canceled in some fashion. So I think they're going to try to use their own internal employees to do the work. Some people had speculated that being a direct Tesla employee, Tesla can maybe force them to work more hours than a contractor employee. But that was speculative, so maybe not true. But just in general, what do you see as the overall implications for Tesla's inventory levels?
So for the inventory levels in the United States, I think just based on, and again, it's all in a way pretty anecdotal, but I think it's some pretty solid reporting that's pretty reliable. I think the inventory in the United States is not shrinking at the rate that it needs to be, or it's not. I think their inventory is building. I think they are making more cars than they are selling right now. I think that anyone who really wanted to get a Tesla with the full subsidy has gotten it, and because of that, the demand cliff that we've talked about is very real. So from there, I think the things that we could look for is that Tesla cuts its production numbers. So they go from producing whatever it was, 1,000 a day, if you believe, reports from highly biased, bullish websites. It's probably somewhere lower, and probably, honestly, in an effort to conserve cash. So I think inventory is low in the U.S. I think inventory is high in the U.S. I think it's going to continue to rise in the U.S. They're going to ship things to Europe, and that's probably going to be successful at first, and then we'll encounter something where demand will be exhausted pretty rapidly. And I think in China, they're just going to have a really rough time selling cars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my guess is that Europe demand will probably start tailing off by April or May at the latest, maybe.
Yeah.
But we'll see how they manage things between now and then. So what other items did you have on your notes to talk about?
Okay, so I wanted to talk about Shorty Air Force, Shorty Ground Force origins. I think we did that. I think we talked a little bit about the inventory. Those were kind of the big things. There's like all sorts of random tangents I could go off of, but a lot of it's not really in my swim lane.
So what are your thoughts about all the Tesla bulls that suggested it's a waste of time to be counting cars or scoping out inventory lots? What are your thoughts on that?
That is a great question. I think that you can't know something until you go and look at it. And you may only get an anecdote. I think Ross Gerber said something, I'm quoting famous investment advisors right now. Ross Gerber said something about, I go into McDonald's and there's, everyone around them has an iPad or an iPhone, and Apple is the future. And anecdotally, that may be true, or at least in that snapshot. And then if you go to stores all across the country and you look and people are not using Apples, well, then I think that would disprove your hypothesis. Hey, I think there's a lot of demand for these cars. Well, I've got a parking lot here in, the middle of Los Angeles that's packed to the gills. That's right near, a SpaceX and a Boring Company property. And these cars don't have license plates. They're not sold. They're not registered to anyone. So what are these cars doing here? Well, okay, that's one anecdote. But then you go across the country to Colorado, and there's a ton of cars. And you go to Boston, like Crow Point Partners has reported on, and there's a ton of cars. And shorting is fun. Another awesome user has gone to, and places all over New Jersey and New York. And there's still a ton of cars everywhere. So when you go to all these places and you start seeing like
Dallas with Covfefe Capital.
Oh yeah, Dallas with Covfefe Capital.
New kid on the ground force.
Yeah, there's a ton of Shorty ground force guys, and I mean I can't do justice by calling them all out, because like the work they've done is incredible. Like I don't know, I drink tequila and I count cars in the parking lot and then I put in a PowerPoint, and like that's my contribution to the cause. I also made a spreadsheet that was kind of useful once upon a time, but these guys like live near these places, and they go to the delivery centers or service centers and they take pictures, and it's incredibly useful information. And when you aggregate it, that's where the real benefit comes in, because you go from having one or two anecdotes to now you're developing a trend, now you're developing a pattern. And we saw that in mid-January. People were going out and taking pictures of all the lots and saying, these cars aren't moving. They're not moving cars. If they're not moving cars, then the demand is going away.
And that was Operation Snapshot, right?
That was Operation Snapshot, and that was a really, really great idea that we kind of had it back in October timeframe. Like we're getting pictures, and by we I mean me and my cat. But we're getting pictures of the cars and we're getting pictures of the parking lots, and we're able to like aggregate that into how many cars are there over how many days. But like when we did that sort of, and this time by we I mean the Shorty ground force did that blitz around New Year's where they just went out and everyone was taking pictures and just giving me tons of awesome data to use. And we turned that into like, hey, here's a realistic inventory. And I think it was about some like 4,000 or so cars.
That were actually counted. Mm-hmm.
That we actually counted. And then if you include the lots that LA Tri-Life found in Los Angeles, that number gets a little bit higher, probably in the realm of 7,000 or 8,000, I think, because he found quite a few in the California.
And there were definitely some known Tesla dealer locations that weren't included in that Operation Snapshot spreadsheet.
Yeah, also true.
Yeah, so yeah, 7,000 plus seemed to be a pretty good estimate from the beginning of January.
Yeah, and I mean, desire for the Model 3 is insanely high. It's just that demand was not, and it's because the car is too expensive. So I think predictively what's going to happen is if we were talking about how in January Operation Snapshot went out and identified that there's a very large inventory of the cars, probably caused by a slowly lowering demand. And then as the Shorty ground force types kept taking pictures and posting it, through mid-January we saw these cars are not moving. They're all staying on their lots. They're not going anywhere. They're not getting sold. And everyone had like their favorite VIN or something with like, the notes written on the glass in marker of like, this car is broken, and if you turn it on, it won't work. Which is pretty funny, but it shows that the cars aren't moving. And that happens when demand drops off a cliff. So we saw that, and I was kind of wondering if, the mouthpieces for Tesla, like Inside EVs, if they were going to report that faithfully. And I was actually really surprised when they did, and they said, like, we didn't sell anywhere near as many cars. And they had the bullish spin on it, which was like, well, sales are always slow at the beginning of a year. And
yes, that's always the case for January.
Which is true. And I saw some, I think it was charts, I think it was Tesla charts put out some good stuff, like, yeah, but demand will drop by 30 or 40% maybe, but not by like 70 or 80%, which is what we saw.
I'm thinking it was in the 20-something% range for other manufacturers and 70-something% for the Model 3.
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, only about 3 times as much. No big deal.
Yeah, it's only 3 times as many cars that they're not selling, and they don't have model years, so it's not like people are holding out for the 2019 Founders Edition Model 3. It's just going to be that same shitty Model 3 that was collecting dust in Lathrop. That's been sitting there for the last 6 months uncharged in some abandoned lot in the middle of wherever United States. So I think that's going to be a barrier to people wanting to buy a brand new Tesla, because it's not going to be brand new. It's going to have been sitting out getting, I think it was Plug-in Fud called it lot rot yesterday, which was a pretty funny term for me.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts of all the pictures, or most ironic parts, is seeing the diesel generators in these inventory lots that are necessary, because otherwise the cars would just not have any electricity left in their batteries and wouldn't be able to start. It's such clean energy from those diesel generators.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, if you want this podcast to go on for another hour, you could get me worked up on the hypocrisy of, a green car company that mines some of the heaviest metals in the world. And who knows where they get them from or by what means they're extracted from the earth. But you could talk about that and how, yeah, they have to run diesel generators, which are not very efficient, just to keep their cars powered. And by the way, their cars lose energy just sitting there, so that's not very energy efficient either.
They lose how much energy while they sit there?
So I don't know exactly how much energy.
Just that they lose energy while they sit there?
Just that they lose energy, and especially in cold weather, their range goes down a significant amount.
Yeah, the denial of the degree to which the range is degraded by the cold weather is another kind of funny thing to see the bulls try to dance around.
Oh yeah.
When there's so many anecdotes, which yes, they're anecdotes, but there's also been some actual studies done by AAA, and there was at least one other one, I don't remember who from, but that have shown clear degradation from the cold weather. But they try to wash that away somehow.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's just a function of electric batteries, or of batteries rather. I mean, that's just what happens to batteries. And if the cars weren't tested rigorously in cold weather because they needed to get the car to market, or the company would go bankrupt. And if it had gone bankrupt, I would have made a lot of money, and that would have been really cool. And that hasn't happened yet, so I guess I'll keep waiting.
So in general, you would say that it is a good use of your time to count cars in parking lots?
In general, well, I don't know what a good use of my time is anymore, but it's fun for me still. I mean, I'm not paid by the Koch brothers to go out and count cars or anything. I do this because it's a hobby and it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun playing like a detective game in a lot of ways with this company because...
I get that sense from a lot of TSLAQ. It's like you got people that are searching through filings, trying to find little nuggets of information here and there.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me because you can get people from all different skill sets, people who know accounting, people who know car manufacturers. Like the Phoenix 10 interview you did was really enlightening for me, and it made me realize, hey, this guy knows a lot about cars and design and manufacture of cars, and that really taught me a lot. And listening to Montana Skeptic, that interview, and like he knows a lot about finance and balance sheets and all that sort of stuff.
And lawyer items,
lawyer items, yeah, and
legal items, I should say.
Legal, and it's very interesting when you get all these different people who look at a company from all different aspects, and they all look from their different aspect, and they say, "I don't think what they're doing is right," and
many different angles that all point to the same conclusion.
Yeah, and I remember there was one Twitter user, I think her name was like Beth Carvin. Her username was Beth Carvin, and just a very nice lady who worked out in Hawaii, I think. I think she lives on Oahu or something. And I'm not doxing her, like this is information she puts out on Twitter, because she's just a normal person. And at the end of Q3, when Tesla was asking its fans to come out and help sell cars, she was like, this is a huge labor relations issue. Like, you can't just bring people in to do a job and not pay them. They have to be counted as temp workers. And, like I had never heard of this lady before. She has no TSLAQ interest as far as I could tell. And she was just like, what you're doing is not in accordance with, established norms. And like any aspect of this organization just stinks to anyone who knows about this specialty area.
Yeah, and on that same note, you've got the video that was, of course, subsequently taken down of the Bird Box challenge, where the dude had engaged autopilot and was wearing a blindfold in the driver's seat, which later got taken down, of course. And you've got the video from just a week or two ago that showed the little touchscreen in the Tesla, and it had just done a software update. And the odometer rolled back from like 76,000 miles to like 75,000 miles. And of course, when I saw that, I was like, that's going to get deleted at some point. So I put out a request saying, hey, can somebody save this? Because it's definitely going to get deleted. And of course, it later got deleted, but we did get it saved beforehand. So that's another thing that TSLAQ does, is documenting these items. And we're getting better at it. Obviously, like you said, you don't get paid by the Koch brothers. I don't get paid directly by the Koch brothers, or indirectly, or by Hot Pockets or anything. I just take I take whatever generous donations people provide via the Square Cash app, but we're getting better at organizing. Big piece of evidence for that is TSLAQ.org, which just launched. And this podcast, I would like to think, is a little bit of that, although I can be kind of rambly at times, and there's no set schedule for when I'm releasing these or anything, but it's adding a little bit of organization to the whole TSLAQ effort. So regardless of what Twitter does with suppressing accounts or outright banning accounts, I feel like we're finding other avenues that will be able to survive regardless of what Jack Dorsey does with Twitter and helping Elon out. But sorry, I went on a little rant there.
That's okay. You're absolutely right. I think all data is good data. Yeah, so I think in terms of what people are going out and finding and posting on Twitter, all data is good data. Pictures of lots are great because it helps highlight that there may be a demand issue. And you know what? If people go out and take pictures of lots and all the cars are suddenly gone and holy crap, they've just sold all their inventory, well, then that's good data too, right? Because you can use that to guide your assumptions about the company and assumptions about their cash flow. And if you get all that, then that's good. Lack of transparency within this company is incredible. I've never seen a company that doesn't report numbers as often, or report numbers as infrequently, report production values, and that's very weird. So any light that we can shed on the operations of this company is very useful. And it's not useful for me because I'm short the company. It's useful for everybody. It's useful for bulls who want to make sure that the money that they're investing in this company is being well guarded as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the fact that they would rather suppress the gathering of data is just mind-boggling to me a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. And I think if they didn't have anything to hide, they would not suppress the data. They would lay their books open. They would report in a timely manner with audited financial results. And, the fact that their chief financial officer retired at the end of a conference call and didn't allow for any questions should be a huge red flag to a lot of people because it was just unannounced and rushed and pretty shoddy. And they haven't released their end of year finances yet.
Well, they've announced them. They haven't released the audited 10K yet. My guess
Correct.
is it'll come late this upcoming Friday, February 22nd, or late on Friday, March 1st. One of those two dates are my top two guesses.
All right, I'll pin that and try and remember. Yeah, I think you're probably right there. And then, one of the fun things about shorting this company for me is that I think there's a lot of momentum that can happen all at once, for better or for worse. I think funding secured was, a bad thing initially that turned into a good thing because it surged the price and made for a pretty obvious short because Elon was lying. And I think a lot of the people right now who say, well, they've got $3.7 billion in cash, which is what I think they reported on their unaudited financial results.
Correct.
I think, I'm speculating, they probably have much less than that actually on hand.
Yeah, there have been many analyses done based on their interest income that show approximately like $1.5 to $1.7 billion average across the whole quarter. So
yeah,
that's one data point to keep in mind.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to me because that means, they haven't accurately reported how much cash they have on hand. And if that causes a big surprise in the downward direction, well, then then they're in the zone of insolvency after they pay these bonds. And then, pretty crazy things could happen. Again, not investment advice, just kind of a hypothesis from me. And, I am, long Reynolds wrap, so I have a lot of tinfoil to wear.
You had a lot of sales with that Star Hopper in Boca Chica too.
Oh my gosh, yeah, yeah. Oh, that thing. I don't even know what that is. I can't even begin to comment on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that could be said about it. Wasn't quite designed for the wind, apparently.
Yeah, there's been some fascinating work on that whole Starhopper timeline from EV Defender. User EV Defender has been really interesting with his timeline reporting, and I'd love to get his timelines rolled into the TSLAQ.org website somehow, if he or the people who run that site are interested.
Yeah, he's definitely been doing a great job. I know he started off, well, that account's only been out there since either the beginning of January or very end of December, but the prior account run by the same person or people being kicked off of Twitter was part of what prompted me to start this podcast, just so that we would have some documentation of some of the timeline of things going on that's outside of Twitter and not controlled by Twitter. But as the EV Defender account, there's been some really good timelines put against the stock price chart, but then over the last week or two, they've been putting these Suntory presentations together, which are outside of Twitter, and lay the timelines out and the stories out in a much better manner. So yeah I agree that's some very good work that's been done there.
Yeah. And again, it kind of goes to the magic of using the internet, and especially using Twitter to kind of aggregate data along. Like that's some great stuff, and it's not very mainstream. I think if it were mainstream, it may open a lot of eyeballs to the fact that there are some less than honorable things going on within this company. But the narrative is being very tightly controlled right now, and that's a real shame, because a lot of people are going to be surprised when this company doesn't have all the money it claims to have, when this company has a lot of those federal investigations that come around, and a lot of the civil liability that they incurred from the 420 funding secured. All that's going to come together, and it's going to surprise a lot of people who are along this company, and they're not listening to us at their own peril, really. Like, at least hedge. At least hedge a little bit. Sell some covered calls.
Just this past week, I've made some observations about, the time frame of things going from us talking about them in TSLAQ Twitter to actually making their way into mainstream media articles. The one particular thing is this NHTSA data that took 641 days to be released, which I ranted about a week ago on episode 16. And the day before, on Saturday, whatever day that was, let's see, I do math, February 9th, I think, I was ranting about it on Twitter in the afternoon. And then finally, last week during the week, there was an article on The Drive by Ed Niedermeyer. There was an article that made it onto Bloomberg from Ryan Bean or something to that effect. I believe there was a really, really excellent article by Russ Mitchell. The focus of that article was more on just the fact that for self-driving, we need transparency from the NHTSA, just so that we as citizens can be confident that that's being regulated properly. So his focus of his article wasn't even directly on the fact that it was Tesla data that was involved. It was more just that the NHTSA has to be transparent to ensure public trust. Then that article, of course, was on the LA Times, because that's who Russ Mitchell works for. Yep. But then I think it got reposted on the San Francisco Gate, which I don't know if that's a paper newspaper or just online. I assume it's paper, but I'm not sure about that. But it was the same article because it was by Russ Mitchell. But just seeing the timeline of when we could rant about it on Twitter on Saturday, Sunday. I ranted about it on my podcast here on Sunday, and then I think the first article was out maybe Tuesday, maybe late Monday. And then more articles Wednesday, Thursday, maybe even one on Friday. So just seeing the timeline of some of that was very enlightening to me. And we may see some more instances of that in coming weeks. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I think for reporters, you can definitely get the attention of reporters on Twitter. I mean, I think it was in probably September timeframe, Neil Beaudet with the New York Times reached out to me and Machine Planet and a couple other people to just kind of ask about like all these pictures we were taking of random lots. And it was an interesting story for him. And, we presented some hard data. And if you can give hard data to reporters, that's, contrary to what the spin is and what the messaging is about a company, they're going to report pretty faithfully, I think. And that's really good for a transparency point of view. And it's not Pravda. It's people finding out a nugget of truth and then publicizing it. Hey, this company has 4,000 cars sitting in inventory in the middle of California when they're supposed to have unlimited demand. Why is that? Hey, this company doesn't have accurate autopilot data, and what is the NHTSA doing about it? And to be fair to the safety people, it's kind of a new paradigm. So they probably don't know what they don't know in terms of how to report on this stuff yet. So they definitely delayed in releasing information, but at the same time, they probably don't know what to do with it. So that may be something to consider. Government employees are not always the most efficient at disseminating and figuring out new ways of doing things.
Yeah. In this case, though, it seemed to be just a fairly clear misinterpretation of the data that they had. And that's laid out in the report from Randy Whitfield about all that. But back to the topic of reporters, one thing that we as TSLAQ should keep in mind is that even though reporters may be aware of some things, they still have to have their stories go through their editors and their editorial boards and everything. So while they may be aware of a story, they may not be able to publish it immediately. There may be some delay, or they may not be able to publish it for some other reason. So that's something to keep in mind. But so be nice to reporters on Twitter,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Point them to things, but don't try to give them assignments, because that's not your job. It's not their job to take your assignments.
Yeah, absolutely. And the better your data is, the more attention you're going to get from a reporter, and it can go good places. If you have something that is worth reporting on, they will key in on that and they will pick it up.
Yes, and one of the key goals, I think, of the TSLAQ.org site was to provide the quick ability for reporters to use some of those images in their stories without having to get permission or anything, if I'm not mistaken.
That is true. TSLAQ.org is definitely there to take information that is crowdsourced and get it out there kind of by the fastest way we can. So it's done a lot of good in that sense. Also, it's off Twitter, which sometimes has a history of censoring people who make claims against Tesla's benevolence.
What? Tesla's not fully benevolent? I thought
No.
they wanted to save the world and give us all unicorns and rainbows and puppies and kittens. Frunk puppies and kittens.
Yeah, the demand for unicorns is incredibly high. It's just that nobody can afford one.
Exactly.
But
they poop out rainbow ice cream, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, they're zero emissions. They're very healthy. Yeah.
Well, any other final items that you'd like to mention before we wrap this thing up?
Final items. I would like to say, thank you to everyone who works the TSLAQ beat. Shorty Air Force, Shorty Ground Force, obviously are the people who I work with most closely. The people who do all the other reporting on financials, on business transactions, all that sort of stuff is just incredibly useful. And you might be a guy who's halfway bomb sitting at your dinner table, and you find something of value that you can contribute. And for me, that was the storage sites thing. And there's still data out there. I think there's still value in getting pictures of lots, even if it only shows that the demand is still very low. And keep at it. Like that's all I can say is just, hey, keep it what you're doing on TSLAQ, and inshallah we'll get where we're trying to go.
All right. Well, thanks for joining today, Scooter. And with that, we'll call it episode number 18 of the TSLAQ podcast. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.